You have 72 hours to vacate the premises. Stephanie Young, 27 years old and drunk on the tiny amount of power that came with managing Riverside Luxury Apartments, stood in the hallway of Unit 3B with her arms folded across her chest. She'd just taped an eviction notice to the door of Harold Hammer Thompson, a 78-year-old man who'd lived there quietly for 4 years. The notice cited suspicious military-style behavior, intimidating presence, and activities that violate community standards and disturb other residents. Harold stood in his doorway, his weathered face confused, his posture still military straight despite his age. "I don't understand. I pay my rent on time. I don't bother anyone." Stephanie's lip curled slightly. "You patrol the hallways at odd hours. You stand outside staring at nothing. Residents have complained about feeling unsafe. This is a luxury community, Mr. Thompson, and frankly, your behavior doesn't align with our standards." The old man's hands trembled, not from age, but from something much deeper. "I have trouble sleeping sometimes. I just walk. I'm not hurting anyone." But Stephanie had already turned away, her heels clicking on the polished floor. If you believe our veterans deserve better than this, type honor in the comments. Harold Thompson had moved into Riverside Luxury Apartments after his wife Martha died, after 49 years of marriage. Their old house in the suburbs had too many memories, too many rooms that echoed with her absence. His daughter had helped him find this place, a modern apartment complex along the Willamette River with security and amenities that were supposed to make his golden years easier. He'd chosen a corner unit on the 3rd floor because it reminded him of elevated positions where you could see threats coming. Old habits died hard, even 50 years after Vietnam. The nightmares hadn't stopped when he came home in 1973, and they hadn't stopped when Martha held him through the bad nights, and they certainly hadn't stopped after she was gone. Some nights he woke up in a cold sweat, back in that bamboo cage, hearing the sounds of the jungle and the guards. Those were the nights he walked the halls, pacing like he used to pace in his cell, counting steps to stay sane. He never thought anyone would notice. He never thought anyone would care. Stephanie Young had been property manager at Riverside for 8 months, promoted from assistant manager after the previous manager retired. She approached her job with the zeal of someone who'd finally found a domain to control. Every violation of the HOA rules, every complaint from the wealthy residents who paid premium rent, every perceived threat to the pristine image of Riverside Luxury Apartments. These were personal affronts that demanded her immediate and severe attention. She had noticed Harold weeks ago during one of her late-night security patrols that were really just excuses to feel important. The old man had been standing by the 3rd floor window at 2 a.m, staring out at the parking lot, his posture rigid. It had unnerved her, though she couldn't exactly say why. When Mrs. Chen from 3D mentioned in passing that she'd seen the old military man walking the halls at odd hours, Stephanie had seized on it. She began documenting Harold's movements, taking notes on her phone, building a case. To her, he wasn't a harmless elderly veteran. He was a liability, a problem to be solved, someone whose presence might lower property values or upset the younger, wealthier residents who made up most of Riverside's target demographic. The eviction notice was the culmination of 3 weeks of surveillance that Harold hadn't even known was happening. Stephanie had written it herself, carefully wording it to avoid explicitly mentioning his age or veteran status, while making it clear that his military behavior was unwelcome. She'd run it past the building's owner, Marcus Chen, via email, but only after framing it in terms of liability and resident complaints. Marcus, who lived in Seattle and managed 6 properties remotely, had skimmed the email and given a distracted approval, not bothering to dig into the details. Stephanie had taped the notice to Harold's door at 9 a.m, timing it so he'd find it on his way back from his daily walk to the small park 3 blocks away. She'd waited in the hallway, wanting to see his reaction, wanting to feel the satisfaction of enforcing the rules. When Harold emerged from the elevator and saw the paper on his door, his face had gone pale. His hands shook as he read it. That tremor in his fingers, the way his breathing quickened, these weren't signs of guilt or anger. They were symptoms of a man being pushed back into trauma, back into a time when he had no control, when authority meant pain and confinement. Colonel James Matthews, retired Marine Corps, had lived in Unit 3C for 2 years, right across the hall from Harold. He was 65, vigorous and sharp, still carrying himself like the officer he'd once been. He'd served in Desert Storm and later in Iraq, retiring with full honors and a comfortable pension. He'd noticed Harold the day the older man moved in, had recognized another military man by the way he carried himself, the precise way he organized his things, the look in his eyes. They'd become friendly over the years, sharing coffee occasionally, talking about nothing important because the important things were better left unsaid. James knew Harold had served in Vietnam. He knew the old man sometimes had bad nights. He'd heard him pacing in the hallway a few times, had opened his door once to check on him, found Harold standing by the window, lost in a memory he wouldn't share. James had just nodded, said rough night, and Harold had nodded back. That was all that needed to be said between men who understood. So when James returned from his morning gym session and saw the eviction notice on Harold's door, his blood ran cold. He read it once, then twice, his jaw tightening with each word. Suspicious military-style behavior. Intimidating presence. Violate community standards. He ripped the notice off the door and marched straight to the management office on the first floor. Stephanie was at her desk, sipping a vanilla latte and scrolling through Instagram, feeling pleased with herself for handling the Harold situation so decisively. She looked up when the office door flew open hard enough to bang against the wall. Colonel Matthews filled the doorway, 6 feet of barely contained rage, the eviction notice crumpled in his fist. "What the hell is this?" His voice was quiet, dangerous. Stephanie's eyes widened. She recognized him as another resident, but had never spoken to him directly. "Excuse me, you can't just barge in here. I asked you a question." James stepped forward, placing the notice on her desk with deliberate care, smoothing it out. "You're evicting Harold Thompson for suspicious military behavior." Stephanie's confidence wavered but held. "Mr. Thompson has been engaging in activities that make other residents uncomfortable. I have documentation. This is a private property and we have standards." "Standards." James laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You want to talk about standards? Let me tell you about Harold Thompson's standards." He pulled out his phone, his fingers moving rapidly across the screen. "Do you know what a Purple Heart is?" Stephanie's face flushed. "Of course I know what a Purple Heart is. I'm not stupid." "Harold Thompson has 3 of them," James continued, his voice cutting. 3. Do you understand what that means? It means he was wounded in combat 3 separate times and kept going back. It means he bled for this country on 3 different occasions." He turned his phone around, showing her a photograph he'd taken months ago when Harold had finally, after many glasses of bourbon, shown him his service record. The image showed a framed collection of medals, ribbons, and certificates. "See that one in the center? That's a Navy Cross. It's the 2nd highest military decoration for valor. Harold earned it during the Tet Offensive in 1968 when he held a position for 16 hours against overwhelming enemy fire, allowing his entire platoon to evacuate." Stephanie's mouth opened, but no sound came out. James wasn't finished. "And do you see these papers?" He swiped to another photo, showing official military documents. Harold Thompson was captured in 1968. He spent 7 years as a prisoner of war in North Vietnam. 7 years in a bamboo cage, tortured, starved, broken, and he never gave up classified information. He never broke. "Do you understand what that means?" The office was completely silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. Stephanie stared at the phone screen, her face draining of color. "I didn't." He never said, Why would he? James demanded. Why would he have to announce his service record to live in an apartment? Why would he need to justify his existence to someone like you? He leaned forward, his voice dropping. Those suspicious military behaviors you documented, that's called PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Harold has nightmares from his 7 years in hell. He walks the halls because he can't sleep, because he's fighting demons you can't even imagine. And you, in your infinite wisdom, decided to evict him for it. Stephanie tried to find words. The residents complained. Mrs. Chen said. Mrs. Chen mentioned seeing him walk. She didn't complain. I checked with her this morning. James straightened up. You manufactured a problem because an old veteran didn't fit your aesthetic vision for this bougie apartment complex. You discriminated against a disabled veteran, which, by the way, is a federal crime. He pulled out another document from his jacket pocket, printed that morning. This is Harold's official VA disability rating, 80% service-connected for PTSD and physical injuries from his captivity. It's protected under the Fair Housing Act. Stephanie's hands were shaking now. I didn't know. How was I supposed to know? You weren't supposed to assume. James's voice finally rose, controlled fury breaking through. You weren't supposed to persecute a 78-year-old man for walking in the hallway of the building where he pays rent. You weren't supposed to decide that his trauma, his sacrifice, his pain made him too inconvenient for your luxury community. He took a breath, reining himself in. But what's done is done. Now we're going to fix it. He pulled out his phone again. I'm calling Marcus Chen right now, and then I'm calling the Veterans Legal Defense Fund. They love cases like this. Stephanie found her voice, panicked now. Wait, please. I made a mistake. I'll tear up the eviction notice. Mr. Thompson can stay. Oh, he'll stay, James said coldly. But whether you do is another question entirely. He pressed dial on his phone. Marcus? It's Colonel Matthews from Riverside. We need to talk about your property manager and a potential federal lawsuit. The next 4 hours were a blur of phone calls, meetings, and mounting panic for Stephanie. Marcus Chen, suddenly very interested in his Portland property, drove down from Seattle and arrived by early afternoon. He sat in the management office with Harold, James, and Stephanie, listening as James laid out the entire situation, complete with photos, documentation, and a printed copy of the Fair Housing Act with relevant sections highlighted. Harold sat quietly through most of it, his gnarled hands folded in his lap, his eyes downcast. When Marcus asked him directly if Stephanie's actions had caused him distress, the old man's voice was barely above a whisper. I thought I'd have to move again, find somewhere else. I just wanted to live quietly. His hands trembled. I don't mean to bother anyone. I can't help the nightmares. Marcus Chen looked at Stephanie with an expression of profound disappointment and anger. He was a first-generation immigrant whose father had come to America after the fall of Saigon, whose family owed their freedom to men exactly like Harold Thompson. You're fired, he said simply. Effective immediately. Clean out your desk. Stephanie opened her mouth to protest, but the look on Marcus's face stopped her. She gathered her things in silence, her face burning with shame as Harold watched with something that looked almost like pity. After she left, Marcus turned to Harold. Mr. Thompson, I cannot apologize enough for what you've endured here. This is my failure as much as hers. I should have been more attentive to my properties. He paused, making a decision. Effective immediately. Your rent is forgiven. For as long as you choose to live here, you'll pay nothing. It's the least I can do. Harold looked up, shocked. Sir, that's not necessary. I can pay my rent. I know you can, Marcus said gently. But I'm asking you to let me do this. Please. James leaned forward. Harold, the Veterans Legal Defense Fund still wants to pursue this. Stephanie violated federal law. You could sue. But Harold shook his head slowly. She lost her job. She's young. Maybe she learned something. He looked at both men. I didn't survive 7 years in that cage to spend my last years angry. I just want peace. The story didn't end there. Word spread through Riverside Luxury Apartments about what had happened, about Harold's service and sacrifice, about the medals in his closet that he'd never displayed, about the 7 years he'd endured as a POW while his wife waited and prayed. The residents who'd never known him, who'd maybe felt uncomfortable seeing an old man in the hallways at odd hours, saw him differently now. Mrs. Chen brought him homemade dumplings and tearfully apologized for even mentioning his night walks. The young couple in 2A asked if they could interview him for a podcast about veteran experiences. He politely declined, but accepted their invitation for dinner. The building's residents, many of whom had never served and had no connection to the military, organized a small ceremony in the common area. They presented Harold with a plaque thanking him for his service, though he tried to refuse it. "The real heroes didn't come home," he said. The same thing so many veterans said, the same guilt that so many carried. Marcus had Harold's story framed and mounted in the lobby, with his permission, not all the details, just a simple recognition of his service and his status as a permanent, honored resident of Riverside Apartments. Stephanie Young never fully recovered professionally from the incident. She found work at another property management company, but her reputation preceded her. The Veterans Legal Defense Fund, despite Harold's wishes, pursued a civil rights complaint that resulted in mandatory training and a settlement. She attended veterans sensitivity training as part of the agreement, where she learned about PTSD, combat trauma, and the invisible wounds that so many service members carried home. In one session, a counselor explained that many POWs developed specific behaviors during captivity: pacing to maintain sanity, standing watch to feel safe, hypervigilance that never fully went away. Stephanie thought of Harold standing by that window and for the first time truly understood what she'd done. She wrote him a letter, not asking for forgiveness, but expressing genuine remorse and understanding. Harold never responded, but he kept the letter in a drawer next to his medals. Meanwhile, James Matthews made it his personal mission to ensure Harold wasn't just tolerated at Riverside, but truly welcomed. He organized a monthly veterans coffee meetup in the common area, which Harold reluctantly attended and which attracted veterans from all over Portland. Harold Thompson lived at Riverside Luxury Apartments for another 6 years, until he passed away peacefully in his sleep at age 84. He never displayed his medals in his apartment, but after his death, his daughter donated them to the Oregon Military Museum, where they are now part of an exhibit on Vietnam POWs. At his funeral, the chapel was packed with people from Riverside Apartments, veterans he'd met through James's coffee meetings, and Marines who'd served with him 50 years ago and had tracked him down after his story went public. Colonel Matthews gave the eulogy, speaking of Harold's quiet strength, his capacity for forgiveness, and his refusal to let bitterness consume his final years. Hammer Thompson survived 7 years of hell and came home to walk among us with grace and dignity, James said, his voice strong despite the emotion. He deserved better than to be judged by someone who couldn't see past her own assumptions. But even in that injustice, he showed us who he really was. Not through anger or revenge, but through mercy and understanding. That's the legacy of a true hero. The lesson of Harold Thompson isn't just about respecting veterans, though that's certainly part of it. It's about the fundamental truth that we cannot judge people's worth based on behaviors we don't understand, on traumas we haven't experienced, on nights we've never had to endure. The man pacing the hallway at 2 a.m. might be fighting demons from a war 50 years ago. The woman who seems paranoid might have survived assault. The person who doesn't fit your comfortable image of normal might have paid prices you can't imagine for freedoms you take for granted. Before you judge, before you decide someone doesn't belong, before you use your small amount of power to hurt someone who's already been hurt enough, stop and consider that you might be looking at a hero and not even know it. Harold never asked for special treatment. He never demanded recognition. He just wanted to live. quietly with his memories and his pain, bothering no one. The fact that he was denied even that basic dignity should shame us all. But the fact that he responded with grace should inspire us. Subscribe to my channel if you believe that veterans and all survivors of trauma deserve communities that understand rather than condemn, that support rather than exile. Share this story if you think that the measure of a society is how it treats those who've sacrificed the most. And if you're in Portland, visit the Oregon Military Museum. See Harold's medals. Remember his name. Remember that heroes walk among us, often invisible, always deserving of our respect. Type honor if you'll remember Harold Hammer Thompson.